Go for this. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by RoderickE. Looking forward to this, what I'm sure is going to be a really different take on healing from you, Roderick. You're Roderick the Maverick, I think.
Roderick the Maverick.
Roderick the Maverick. That could be a new title for a book, couldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, fellow adoptee and author, you're prolific. You love writing, don't you?
I have. Ever since I was young, I would write in spiral notebooks and keep them, and they didn't amount to anything. But eventually, I started doing it for a living. So
yeah. So listeners, regular listeners will know that Roderick's been on in the past, and I'd encourage everybody to check out the show notes so you can find out what Roderick's about. There's some great books on about adoption and other stuff too. So healing. What does healing mean to you, Roderick?
Well, that's a tricky one because obviously healing means a lot of things to a lot of people, different things. First of all, we as adoptees, we have to decide what are we healing from. Now, a lot of us have been exposed to the book, the Primal Wound, which tells us we're healing from a primal wound, a wound that happened before maybe our existence, even our physical being. If you've ever read any of my books, I hate trying to tell people what to believe or what to think. I always say, here's a possibility, and here's a possibility, and here's a possibility. You come to your own conclusion. So I don't want to tell people adoptees do or don't suffer from this primal wound that we're constantly told. But I know for myself, I've never thought of myself as really damaged goods most of my life. Now, I have found out as an adoptee that I've always felt lonely. I don't know if that's a wound or not, alone in the world, because I didn't know my heritage. I didn't know who I was. We as adoptees, maybe we don't all do it, but we kind of make up a fiction. Even if you're adopted by a good family, a nice, happy family, you make up a fiction as to what your background really is, or you ignore it altogether. I don't know how people handle that, but so the first question is, what are we trying to heal from, right?
Yeah. And my kind of questioning question, right? The fundamental question is, what's wounded,
right?
Because so there's this presumption, there's a built-in presumption, if when we're talking about healing, that there is something to heal.
Right.
I love your question. What are we healing from? And I'd throw mine into the mix. Or what's wounded? I think one of the things that we could do is kind of ask ourselves. We've got to come to. I love the take that you're doing. We've got to come to our own perspective on this. And I didn't believe that I was wounded until I read The Primal Wound. I had there was a question within. I had questions within me about my emotions, but like you, I didn't really feel that. That's not what I would have said about me. So. And yet I'd run a podcast and I ask everybody what's about healing. For me, the big thing last year was coming up with this idea that healing happens on different levels. So on one level, if we do feel wounded, if we have had, we do feel that we've had trauma, and we've been psychologically damaged by it, then perhaps that healing will go on for forever, and yet at another level, the essence of who we are isn't wounded. It's kind of my take on it.
I worry about, and again, we're just exploring. My background is a data analyst, so I analyze data, and I bring up data points all the time, and I have all the time in my career. And some people are like, well, you're going in this direction. You're going, no, I'm just bringing up the data point, and then we'll talk about where it leads to. I'm not making any argument for either way. But my first thing I'm thinking about here is the power of suggestion. As you said, you didn't know you were even wounded. You didn't feel like you're wounded until that book told you you're wounded. I don't know if that's a power of suggestion that it's planted in your psyche, or if you really started saying, oh yeah, that's me. Oh yeah, that's me. And oh, that's me. It's hard to tell, especially in this day and age of TikTok videos. If you've ever been on TikTok, there's a lot of people on there who are telling everybody their traumas and dramas and everything else that, and it goes on. Sometimes you look back 2 years and it's just, wow, well, you haven't healed. I'm not talking about adoptees. I'm just talking about anybody on there. It's pretty bad on TikTok, I thought.
Yeah, I looked at it I looked at it yesterday because somebody asked me to participate into like add my take to an adoptees group, and I politely declined because it didn't feel right to me. I have had some very extreme feelings about my birth mother. So, but does that mean I'm traumatized? Yeah, maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Like it is. It's a tricky one, and people talk about. You mentioned this data points one, and a lot of people bring up this data in terms of the increased probability of suicide and mental health amongst the adoptee community. So that's a tricky one that people might fire back at you. Has anybody fired that back at you, Roderick?
Yes, and I do. There's another, as a data analyst, I found another statistic that's strange too, because, and again, there's no judgment in what I'm saying here. So please, anybody who's listening, I'm not judging anybody for what I'm ready to say, especially. But I've noticed that adoptees in general, maybe it's because we feel alone in the world, a lot of us do, that we choose alternate lifestyles. There are a lot of transsexual adoptees, there are a lot of homosexual adoptees that's already going to make your life even more difficult because that's not accepted, if you want to call it that, in society. So not only are you an adoptee, now you're expressing a view of lifestyle that's going to probably get some pushback from various people, and it seems odd and different. Maybe you're doing that because it's a call for help, or maybe it's who you want to be. I don't know what it is, but that maybe we add that into the mix, and that's another reason why adoptees might have a high suicide rate, because they tend to select lifestyles that are very difficult to live with, I think.
Yeah. And again, I think, I don't know, it depends what you call a lifestyle. I don't know. There's alternative lifestyles and an alternative or different sexuality. Right. And a lot of, I know a few gay people, and I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't say that was a choice. That is kind of who they are. That's how.
Right. Okay. Well, just say they develop that and then they express it more. I mean, we talk about just simple things like adoptees might, do a lot of piercings, or they just want to look different. They want to look different than the rest of the world. And I think it's an outward expression of their I don't fit in, and that itself makes them almost a target, or something that people look at, society looks at and goes, oh, we don't want you, which depresses them even more. If they gauge their ears, or they pierce or they get tattoos all over them because they want to be different, or they pretend or they not pretend, I'm not using that word, they participate in like Wiccan witches and things like that. They become outside what we call the norm. I hate to use that word, but whatever word can use, the typical, I guess, is a better word. The typical that society would reference, that makes that even more difficult. So I don't know if it's the adoptee status that causes them to be more depressed and potentially for suicide, or it's the adoption of those lifestyles or behaviors. It's hard to pin down what word I want to use to describe that. So
it's a tricky one.
Right.
It's definitely a tricky one. I saw some data, and I mean, data can, as a data analyst, you can tell us how much data can be chosen, right, manipulated, etc.
Or omitted. You can just say, hey, here's how many adoptees commit suicide percentage wise, and they don't even factor in all these other things I just said that might be the factor. But
yeah,
so we don't know.
We're looking for simplicity. Right. The one that came to my mind was, have you seen that the series on Chernobyl? It's a drama series, and they when the local Communist Party near the power plant is reporting on the early stages of this meltdown, they say that the Geiger counters are reading. I can't remember the exact numbers, but the Geiger counters are reading 200. And the people at the center say that the next level up, they say, well, that's okay, because that's not a bad score. But there's two different Geiger counters, right? So low level people in the party have a Geiger counter that only goes up to 200, right? And that's all it measures up to. And people higher up in the party have a Geiger counter that measures up to 3,000.
Reality, yes.
So the guys with 3,000, the Geiger counters that read up to 3,000, assume that the other guys are using that Geiger counter, not the one. They don't even know that there's a lower class, a lower status, a less accurate a Geiger counter that only measures up for 200. So it depends. Our data, or I can't know, data all depends. But we're always looking for that silver bullet reason, aren't we? We're looking for silver bullet on any statistics that we're given.
Right. And so as an adoptee, or this can apply to anything, actually, when you start seeing these statistics by whomever puts them out, no matter what it is, we're talking politics, social, whatever it is, you need to look at yourself and say, if you're going to apply it to yourself, does this really apply to me? Or is it something else beyond what they're saying here? Like that power of suggestion I said. So
yeah. Do you still feel lonely?
No, not so much, because if people know the story from last time, I have found my birth family, and I found my biological sister, who was also given up for adoption at birth, 2 years before I was, and we're in a relationship, friends and stuff like that, hang out, and we're living together. So that's replaced that part has replaced that, and knowing my heritage and background. So that's not so much there. Obviously, it never goes away, because it was still, if you want to call it, stolen from you, or at least kept from you for a long time. It took me a while to become who I am now.
Yeah. So part of then, if we were going to call healing, if we're going to say, if we were going to define healing as the lessening of unwanted emotions, then we could say, well, you felt lonely. You feel less lonely now because you've done this. You've made a connection, and that has been part of your kind of healing experience, if we're going to use it that way.
Let me clarify the definition you gave. You said unwanted emotions. I'm not very emotional guy. That's how I have to be a data analyst.
Yeah,
really roll. But I prefer to call them not unwanted emotions, but unstable emotions that we allow to become erratic. So adoptees, so I'm saying we're talking about how you choose these different behaviors or lifestyles that may make your situation worse. Now, when I was growing up, I decided I have so much instability in my life. I'm going to make my life as stable as possible. I was married for 32 years. My jobs that I kept very long. I mean, I did everything I could to make my life very, very stable. And that was my defense, I guess you want to call it, to dealing with this unstable emotions that might happen because I'm adopted. But now I don't have to do that so much anymore. I've been able to let go because I understand who I am and everything else. Now, I can't speak for people who haven't found the birth reunion to their biological. They're still there, I think. They have to deal with it and cope with it in a different ways, and I'm not here to tell anybody how to do that.
Yeah. Would you say that what you did was a coping mechanism then?
Yeah, definitely a coping mechanism, but it kept the stability. I think that's something we all suffer from. But sometimes we have delusions. We say, okay, here's the birth or adoptive family I'm with, and here's what they want me to do, and I'll become part of that. And you just kind of immerse yourself in that. And it could be a happy family, it could not be a happy family. Who knows? However you have to cope with it, you've done coping. But I've always said the best way to stop the battle or the war is to step away. Peace is just one step away from whatever the war is. The war can follow you, the battle can follow you where you go, but you first got to step away from it. A lot of people want, I'm going to fight the system, I'm going to fight the adoption laws. I'm going to, okay, you can do all that, but while you're doing that, you're still in the war. So if you ever want to heal, you have to step away from the battle for a moment. Otherwise, the arrows are going to keep coming, especially if you encourage them to come. How dare you do something? I've interacted with adoptees who wanted to abolish adoption. I don't know how that works because human nature will always have people for some reason that have to relinquish their children, whether they can't handle it mentally or something goes wrong. That's always going to be the case. You can't abolish adoption. We need to fix it so some of the things that cause the problems hopefully go away, or at least decrease.
So we're fighting the system, and on the external part, and but internally we're fighting our feelings, aren't we? That's part of the challenge.
Right. And we might believe if I can just fix this, nobody else will have to suffer like I am. Who knows if we're going to make it better for the next guy? Because if you abolish adoption, how is that going to work? You force the people to keep their children who don't want to or aren't capable of keeping their children. I don't know what some of these other adoptees, when they talk about abolishing adoption, is going to work. I'm not pro-adoption, but I am pro. For example, one thing I would do different if I could, I would tell anybody who's given somebody for adoption, you got until they turn 18 to figure out what to do, because by 18, we're going to tell them everything. And some people, wow, really? Yeah, I think that should be. And plus, I think if you're going to relinquish anybody for adoption nowadays, you should have to go through a battery. The person who's going to relinquish the mother and the father should go through a battery of tests about their health history, and that should follow the adoptee from day one. We shouldn't have to wait and figure out, well, am I anemic or am I diabetic? All that stuff should just follow me from day one.
Yeah.
Even if we don't mention the names of our biological parents.
Yeah. There's a lot in there about the rights to our access.
Right.
How do you think that or what do you think is the impact of these people trying to change the system? How do you think? How do you see that impacting them?
Well, it's been positive and negative. Obviously, my positive was the nice state. Not until about 5 years ago did they allow that. You actually had to wait until your biological parents, either agreed to some kind of form they had to fill out, or they were deceased. And in my case, they were both deceased. So when I sent in my form, they sent it back a couple months later or less and told me, here's your mother's name. And it was just like magic. It wasn't slow. Normally when you have big major things, it comes slowly, but it's like, here's a piece of paper and here's who you are. And that was really shocking to me, because now I had to figure out, you go in a tailspin. Who is it? So again, sort of like you say, I didn't really know, and you didn't know that you were really as wounded as you were until they're shown.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's that. The one that always comes back to me is this idea of there's the kind of the pre-verbal part of the trauma, so we haven't got words for it, and yet so many people are offering us talk therapy. Talk. So how can talk, and this is a big realization from talking to some therapists last year, how can talk therapy work with pre-verbal trauma? It's literally it's trauma that we don't have words for,
and we don't even know why we're suffering certain things. That's why I do that. It might be a longer time before you figure that out. It's funny because I have this, well, I guess she's a relative, had nothing to do with adoption, but she went to some therapist, and the therapist was teaching her how to interact with not hostile people, but people that tend to be a little more brash. And the therapist recommended that she get really stern, look very concerned, and say, I don't appreciate the way you're treating me. Well, that sounds great, but it doesn't really work in the real world, especially if the person's already an antagonist. They will probably antagonize you more. And so that was happening to her. She was being antagonized more. That method that the therapist gave her to use wasn't working. She eventually got to the point where she was a little bit brash back, and that started working. Because sometimes brash people, antagonists, they want you to put them in their place. That lets them know that you're on their level. But if you try to pretend, oh, please don't do that. So we have to be careful as adoptees who we're letting into our minds and hearts and souls, because sometimes these therapists are They're not even adoptees. They have no idea. And as you said, there's no way of explaining to them. They think they have all the degrees and everything. They think they can tell us how to handle this, but they really can't. So I think
Yeah.
it's good to talk to fellow adoptees and see how they've handled it.
Yeah. This is, but the question for me on this is always around this pre-verbal trauma, unremembered trauma, if it happened. Like it's a fascinating world where what I believe that what we focus on gets bigger. And if we're focusing on the trauma all the time, then the trauma is going to get bigger, and we're going to. And I wonder how I would have been when I read The Primal Wound, if I'd gone into the Facebook world then and had all these other people reinforcing this, then I did a pretty good job of reinforcing it on my own. I didn't need anybody else's help.
I think it's worse nowadays. I mean, because then you have all the social media, and what's the old phrase? Misery loves company. You look for it, you're going to get it.
Yeah, and that's why we focus on healing on the podcast. Because
right.
I think we've had, I've had it to the back teeth, about the trauma. I've seen what it's like. I've felt what it's like when I focus on this stuff. I took, one of my big questions is, how can this abandonment become a belief that we're not good enough? There's some brain, what started off as and who can remember how visceral was it? How I can't remember it, what it was like going to short-term foster care at maybe a week old, and then being collected by my birth mother 4 weeks later, and then going into them. I can't remember all this, but I can feel like we got a new dog last year, and this new one didn't cry at night, but we've had dogs that cry at night, and I'm thinking, well, was I like that? So there's this anguish that I may or may not have felt, who knows, and then the belief that we're not, the belief that I'm not good enough, that's a central. So there's some thought comes into play here, right?
Right. I think as a data analyst, I think sometimes we overanalyze things, and then we get caught in that trap of what about this and maybe that, and maybe there's certain things you have to say, I can never know this part. It's hard to say that, but I can never know this part. I'm going to have to let that go. Yeah. Otherwise, yes, it will tear you up.
Yeah. That's another question, I think, that we can ask ourselves. I'd encourage people to ask, how can this experience, the experience of loss, become a belief that we're not good enough? It does involve it does involve our brains looking for meaning somehow.
Right. Well, I'm a determinist. So that means that I believe things happen for a reason. Not always. We don't always know what it is, but I believe that. At least I use that as my philosophy in life. It might not even be true, but I use it in my philosophy of life. So what I've always taken away from this is, as an adoptee, it's given me an opportunity. Like, for example, I'm the author of a lot of different subjects, as you know, genres. It's allowed me to be disconnected from what's typically the familial bond. Like, sometimes you've heard of blood is thicker than water, and you never you keep the dirty laundry in the family. Okay, well, none of that really applied to me because I didn't feel that bond. So I've been able to explore areas in an unbiased way, at least a less biased way than I would have I had those strong. So to me, in a way, it's a blessing rather than a curse that I was given up for adoption. I have no bond. So I don't know how other people use that, but that's how it does me. It's not like, oh, I was rejected and they gave me up and woe is me. It's more like, okay, well, this is an advantage for me. That's how I've always looked at it.
Wow. Because we are encouraged to look at, people do talk about looking for looking for the positives out of this, and such as, like our resilience. So whatever, whether the extent of this pre-verbal trauma or what's gone on for us is, we have become, we've become very flexible and adaptable. And like sometimes that seems like it's a strength, and sometimes that seems like it's a weakness. For me, I depending on my mood.
Right.
Depending on my mood.
An anecdotal part of that is funny because when I was in school, school kids always they're kind of cruel to each other sometimes, and the school kids in my era would say stuff like, "Well, your mama this and your mama that." Well, since I didn't really know my mama, my biological one, it didn't hurt me; just rolled off. Now I didn't have any connection to that. She could have been all the things they said because at the time I had no idea who she was. She could have been just as bad or just as good. I had no reason to defend her because I didn't know anything about her. So that was kind of an advantage, if you want to call it that. So
Yeah.
something interesting.
So I heard some stats a couple of months ago, actually, that adoptees are more likely to get bullied. And I think bullies tend to pick on people that are different for whatever reason.
We're not part of the group. We're not part of the tribe. By nature, we are individuals. We are outside the tribe in general. So it's going to convey earlier. We're outside of any tribe. I mean, you and I are white men, but technically we're even in a way more, I don't know the word oppressed, but marginalized than any other group. I mean, you could be a black man or a Hispanic man who knows your full history all the way back, and we're more marginalized than that, to me, because we at some point we didn't know who our heritage was. Sure, we can look ourselves in the mirror, but we don't know who we really are. We didn't, at least. I think you found your birth family too, so, or at least your background to it. So, but
Yeah.
before that, I felt marginalized. I felt like an individual who everybody else was not like me. I couldn't identify with anyone.
So, what meaning, you talked about being a determinist. What meaning did you put on being adopted?
Again, the meaning I put, because it'd be in terms of that I was put here to look at the world differently. Now, again, I'm not trying to get all spiritual or anything like that, but I did look at the world differently. So whether I was put here just because of circumstances, I looked at the world differently. I could stand back and look at it from a further perspective without being crowded by all the potential things that are going on, and not see the the forest for the trees, like they say. So
yeah,
and it's still the case, even though I'm now coming out of the other side, and I know who I am. I have a heritage, but I'm still able to use that to my advantage.
Yeah, and how does that benefit you? How would you say that benefits you?
Well, it's definitely benefited, because if you noticed any invention or innovation that we've ever had in history, most of them at least, the airplane, the automobile, the computer, has been invented not by a tribe, not by a collective, not by a government, but by some individual who said, well, you know what, I'm going to do something different. So as an adoptee, I'm completely disconnected from things that might hold me back to, oh, I better not do this because the tribe might get upset if I do this, if I step out of line. I'm not part of any tribe, so I've been able to try and write about different things, for example, and do different things without worrying about whether the tribe was to pull me back into line. So I think that's an advantage. It's still an advantage to this day.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's a lot of adoptees who are looking for that tribal mentality, and they'll try to get that by hanging around other adoptees. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm noticing this is a pattern. So they'll get with a lot of adoptees, get in adoptee groups, and that's their new tribe. And that might not be any better than the other tribes they could have been part of, because now you have these influences. It could be better, it could not. You just got to be careful, because again, this is our heart and minds we're giving over to people. Yeah. To kind of mold and shape, and that power of suggestion that I told you about, that they could easily plant there.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on validation? Validation from others.
From others?
Yeah.
Well, I've always been a pretty radical individualist, but what I do with validation from others is I listen to what they have to say about me or something about, and instead of getting defensive right away, oh, that's not true, I wait and I say, is that true? I ask myself, is that true what they're seeing me? Why am I giving off that perspective? And if more and more people do it, why is that what I want to give off? Why am I giving off? Is it true? I keep asking that question. So it's not really so much validation. that I look for, but I do look for what they're saying, their criticisms, and or even their positive things, and say, is that true? Is that what I want to be? Is that who I want to project? And then I might modify my life based on those assessments.
Yeah, because it seems to me that validation it can be a double-edged sword.
Yes, definitely. That's really. I try to avoid that.
It's been
that's the pulling you back in the tribe thing, almost. Though,
it's well, there's a relief. There's a relief with validation, and sometimes that can keep me stuck. Right. So I've had a lot of coaching, for example, and coaches are usually trying to ask you questions to see through. We can't, as one of my favorite sayings from a mentor coach guy I had like 10 years ago, is it's hard to see the picture when we're in the frame.
Right. That's
so
about.
Yeah. And so, you talked about, taking on board what people say with well, not rejecting it out of hand, taking an opinion and validating it for yourself rather than seeing what they said as the truth, which I like that, actually. I've never thought about doing it quite like that. So what I would say about my own take on validation is that there's a relief in hearing that somebody feels or thinks the same way as me. But then I think about all the coaching that's helped me change for the better. And a lot of that has been based on asking me questions so that I question my own stuff, especially in business, right? On my own, my planned activities have you thought all the way through what's the consequence of that action? Is that what you really want to do? Is that really going to help you? And so the question from them leads me to question what I'm doing in a good, hopefully proactive.
Well, that's a good form of validation. That's a positive, but the negative form of validation could be, if you're not like us over here, then something else is still wrong with you. That's a bad type of validation. I think a negative type of validation. And sometimes people are looking for that too, because sometimes it's the easy way. Well, I'm part of this group and this is what this group does. And so I'm normal. I'm okay because this group does that. Well, that group might not be helping you. That group might be stuck in some part where now they have you stuck there too. So you got to be careful of that. That's not what you're talking about. I'm just giving a contrast.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is good, because that person's actually trying to make you think outside the potential box or frame you're in, and let you figure out how to get out on your own without telling you how to get out.
Yeah, that's why I say the double-edged sort of validation. On one hand, it makes us feel good, but on another hand, it can keep us stuck, and we fall into the group norm stuff. So like at the moment, I put this. We got this focus on healing. Trying to focus on healing. Everybody tells me it's a good idea. It's a good idea to focus on healing, Simon, and yet the actions don't seem to be following it somehow.
Well, again, to me, if I had to say one thing you do to start the healing, just walk away from whatever the chaos is. Now, I'm not saying it's going to go away. Just walk away from whatever it is for a moment. I mean, let's say, for example, if you're a woman or a man in a hostile, toxic relationship, just, if you can, step away from it. Don't, I'm going to get revenge about this person. I'm going to post 5 TikTok videos and I'm going to take them to, okay, well, you're still in the battle. You're still in the battle, and you might be right. I'm not saying you're not justified, but if you want to start the peace process, step away for a moment and then maybe regroup. But there's too many times this society tells us we have to defend ourselves. We have to fight the good fight. We have to keep on being in the struggle. So all these words we used that seems to make us keep us into the fight instead of making us get to the peace.
So when did we when did we start thinking that justified anger was a good thing, or that anger could be justified? When has that been with us forever? I mean,
it's human nature, but that's the one thing. Whether I call them ideologies more than religions, but whatever ideology you adopt, whether Hindu, Christianity, most of those talk about this peace, and the peace usually happens by walking away from the fight. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, or give them your cloak if they steal from you. And then you have the Hindus that basically say, don't struggle with this, don't try to obtain this. It's all the same thing in human nature. If you want this peace, you have to walk away from the fight for a moment. And unfortunately, by human nature, we want to fight. We want to defend ourselves. How dare they? It's just part of who we are. And so that's one reason I've gotten here, and it's so peaceful to live where I live and to have a simple life. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking of years ago I used to get the train to London for work, and people would get on when the train arrived into York. People would kind of amble down the platform and get on the train, and then the same people, when they hit the energy of London, they would be running. They're almost running. They're just walking at a faster pace, because they picked up on the vibe around them. And I was just thinking, am I doing that?
And you probably are, unless you insulate yourself and realize and push back, like I said, a little bit as the adopted. It's an advantage. Maybe it's an advantage as you look there and see what all the various tribes are doing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Who's been important to you in coming to your philosophy on life? Where is you, like, I know you do a lot of writing, but did you do a lot of reading as well? Did you?
Yes, I do a lot of reading. See all the ideologies, religions, and stuff as well. And I look for a synthesis because I'm a data analyst. So what's the key component between all these? Whether we believe they're true or not, like I said, I think it's human psychology. And the Bible and the Hindu Vedas, humans have been looking at themselves and who they are for a long, long time, and why they behave the way they do. And so I try to look for why that is, and what has been working for us as a psychology, and to remain in peace and to live a life that's not constantly at a struggle and constantly. That's what they do. They walk away from it. They walk away from it. Doesn't mean you don't help fellow humans or anything, but it's the old saying, not the old saying, but if you're right on a plane and they say to yourself, make sure you secure your mask first before you help others. Well, it's odd, but that's a good philosophy in general. If you can't fix yourself, don't go around trying to fix other people. First, get yourself stabilized, and then you can stabilize your friends, your family, and everything. But if you're chaotic, you're not helping anybody.
Yeah. So what's helped you find that stability?
Well, obviously, finding my sister has lived kind of a chaotic life to my biological sister, but she's also finally got to the point where she has this philosophy. She calls it collecting the positives. So we all get upset. We all get, might say things we don't want to say or get angry for dumb reasons. But she says, I need to collect the positives. I need to stay positive no matter how, even if it looks unfair what's happening to me, I need to collect the positives. And that's been a really amazing thing on me. I call it the impossible compassion is what she has, because it's almost impossible to do because it's against human nature to be this compassionate. We want to fight. We want to get our do justice. We want to get our revenge on people or defense. And hers is more like, if it happens, it happens. There's not much I can do about it.
Yeah.
So I see that in a lot of the ideologies where you're basically told to not fight, not struggle. Like, no, that's not my nature. I want to fight. I want to struggle.
Yeah.
So
the piece is waving the white flag or walking away or both, depending.
It's not so much waving the white flag, it's walking away. So like if somebody expected you to get on the battlefield, like used to do battles a long time ago, that the armies would line up on the battlefield because their weapons didn't go very far, and they'd just stand there for shoot arrows or shoot guns, and whoever left standing, that's the winner of the battle. Well, if that's how battle really works, all you have to do is turn around and walk away. It's not waving the white flag. It's not giving up. It's not surrendering. It's like, I'm just not going to participate in your battle. I don't want to participate. I'm walking away. Now, can the battle follow you? Sure, it can. Be prepared for that. But if you want to start the peace, you at least have to walk away.
Yeah.
From the battle.
So did you read a lot of like Greek thinkers when you were growing up and stuff like that? I mean, it sounded.
Yeah, the Greek philosophy is really interesting because basically you have these different various gods controlling human beings and doing different things like with chess pieces with them. And that always, even still to this day, disturbs me. I sometimes jokingly say, "Oh, you're going to get yours when I get up there," because I feel like those Greek gods are controlling me. How dare you make this happen? Because certain things will happen a certain way. You think there's just no way all this can happen the way it's happening without some kind of influence that controls it, because it just seems unlikely. It's too random. So
Yeah,
I jokingly say, but who knows? I don't think any of us know. I'm sorry.
yeah,
No matter what religion you think I'm not certain any of us know. So the worst we can do, and I have this philosophy now, is I try to be honorable and honest. And obviously, honest is objective. We know what that is. Just don't lie. Try not to lie. Honorable is subjective. We all know honorable when we see it, even from our enemies. We know what it is, but we can't really always define what it is. But we know when we see it. So I try to be honorable and honest. That is my religion. So
yeah, yeah. Tricky for when. What did you call it from your sister? Impossible compassion.
yes, impossible
Yeah,
compassion. So someday it will be a book, but I don't know. I don't think I'm a good enough disciple yet of that. I'm
no,
waiting a little longer before I write anything about it.
yeah. I'm thinking about what the does impossible compassion also extend to people that have lied to us? I guess it must, doesn't it?
It does. A lot of times I don't know if you have any children, but my child that's growing up, that she was growing up, I would know sometimes when she was lying to me, and I'd let her lie to me, and I'd let her go to the whole whatever she's going through, and then either sometimes I'd confront her with a lie, depending what it was, or I'd let her realize that I know in her own way, and see how it was pointless. Like when she was younger, she used to say, like a lot of kids do, "I can't wait until I get 18 to move out of here." I said, "Well, that's really good because as job of as your father, my job is to get you to the point where you don't need me. You're out when you're 18 or wherever old, wherever the adulthood is." So it just kind of put a shocked look on her face because she expected me to fight with her. Like most, how dare you? You're going to listen to me. You're in my house. You're going to do what I say. Okay, that's what most parents would do, and then we're taught to do that. Mine was, no, I want you to be independent. I'm getting you there. So
Yeah, takes the well. Me and my missus haven't got any kids, but I guess it takes this. Sounds like it takes the sting out of the argument.
it does. And that's the whole walking away from the battle. Doesn't mean we're going to not have to engage in battles at some point, but we don't have to engage in every battle. We definitely don't have to stay in the battle 24/7, like a lot of us want to do. I'm an adoptee and how dare, and it's my privilege and my right, and I'm going to behave this way because what happened to me? How dare you people? And some adoptees are like that. They want to get in people's face as well. I mean, just not just adoptees, anybody from different traumas they might have. How dare you? I'm a Asperger's sufferer, or I'm this, and I demand that you hear me this way, and demand you identify me this way. Well, you keep doing that, you're constantly in the battle, and you're constantly struggling. It's okay to be those things, but why do you always want to be identified by this struggle, this battle? You're never going to have peace.
Yeah. What stops us seeing that stuff?
What stops us saying that stuff?
What stops us seeing this stuff for ourselves?
What stops us from seeing this stuff?
Yeah, seeing the stuff that you're talking about. Do you think?
Well, again, it's introspection. It starts with when people say stuff about you or your own self. Why am I behaving the way I behave? A lot of people just don't do that anymore. There's, like I said, these TikTok videos are just, to me, I watch them like, that's a person who will have 2 years of nothing but this stuff over and over. It's like, do they ever stop and go, wonder what people think about this? No, because they're taught to, I'm not going to cuss on here, but the F people, I'm going to do what I want, and how dare they even, and I'm going to be big and bad. Well, that doesn't help you. You're still in this battle.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you to be really like a wonderfully nice person, like a Pollyanna person, like you can never offend anybody. But at the same time, why did you go out of your way to constantly be this badass that wants to scare people? But at the same time, you're also a victim. I see this badass victim uh, thing going on this all the time on the TikToks and the social media. It's like I don't get it. You could just step away from this, and you wouldn't have any of that anymore. But I think they thrive on some of it
because we get more attention if we share our troubles, don't we?
right. Misery loves company. So I mean, even as adoptees, okay, fine, we're adoptees. We begin to understand who we are. But I think part of it is also we know inside we don't want to be always labeled. Oh, there's that adoptee. There's that adopted kid. There. Oh, here's that. Oh, did you hear? Her parents left her. Her mom didn't want her. you keep doing that, you want to get away from that. You want to be transcend all these identities, these labels that people put on you, and even that you put on yourself sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And become a person first.
So it's the lack of introspection that keeps us stuck. Yeah.
I think it is really the lack of introspection and the lack of being able to say, I don't have to fight this battle, just step away. Those two things together, I think, will start bringing you peace and healing that we're talking about here. But if you're constantly fighting the battle or constantly looking back at the trauma, especially the trauma that you don't even know, like we talked about earlier, the unverbalized trauma, we don't even know if it really is. Like for instance, I think I was told most of the stories, my mother wore girdles. She was trying to hide her pregnancy. Later in her life, she was upset that she gave me up. But I don't know the whole story. I have no idea how beat up. Will make me feel better if I feel like she was really beat up about it and she really wanted me. And I don't know if I will or not. I can't fill in those gaps, and I'm not going to. In a data analysis, we call those outliers. Sometimes you have the small numbers, and sometimes you have the big numbers, and they're like these data points don't match all the other points in between. And what typically in data analysis you do, you set that aside for a moment until you can figure out the truth. Yeah. Instead, it seems like us adoptees, we want to focus on these unresolvable data points that we really can't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's brought you to peace with those? What's brought you to peace with those unknowns?
Again, they're outliers. I have to say I can't know this. I mean, it's about anything. You can't, if like, let's say if you were worried about the end of the world, like some people, some religious people, it could happen tomorrow. You're often told Jesus is coming back tomorrow. Well, if you really, really believe that in your heart, you'd probably sell everything. You would never get married. You'd never do anything, because if you really believed it, apparently we don't really believe it, because people continue on and do daily lives. So you have to realize what you have to set aside. You can't know it. You can't let it affect you. Sometimes maybe you do know it, but what can I do about it? I might not be able to do anything about it. So I have to set that aside. Maybe I'm not saying forget about it and pretend it doesn't exist. You want to absorb it into yourself, but you can't dwell on it like an Oprah Winfrey show or something. You can't do that. You're just going to be stuck there.
Yeah. I know a guy who sold his house because he in the credit crunch, right? He saw the credit crunch happen right. ahead of time because of the work that he does. So he sold his house, thinking that there was going to be a correction, a massive drop in the housing market here in the UK, and it was going to last. And I think there was a drop, but it came back, and it's way much stronger than it was, whatever it's 16 years ago. But now, I don't know, now he's kind of stuck because the house that he's renting, well, the house that he sold will probably have gone up in value, doubled or maybe tripled since then. And I don't know whether he's got the money to get back into the market. He's now stuck. He seems to be kind of stuck renting now, I think.
It's like he focused on that outlier data point and made all his decisions on that instead of going, here's what they typically are. Let's stick with these data points and see what happens. I'm not saying you won't get burnt sometimes when you do that, but that's a safer route. That's a more stable route. Yeah.
I think this finding peace with that, the unknowns is a profoundly personal personal thing. But we've got to find our own peace. Nobody can kind of give that to us.
We said that at the top of the show. I'm definitely not here to say how people cope with things, everything else. But I know if you want to find peace, you have to cope with them some way. You can't keep exacerbating them. You can't keep them stirring them up and fighting and struggling with them all the time, because you will never find peace that way. Yeah. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. It grows and grows and grows. So,
yeah, that's it. Thanks, Roderick. And if you want to take another look at something that's completely fresh, listeners, and a completely different perspective on this, then check out Roderick's books and find out more. I feel it's really important that we bring all the perspectives to the listeners' ears, and then we can take what helps out of what we've listened to. It's great.
Yes, and I appreciate that. I've seen you do that over the years, and I appreciate that take. You're not bottling people into a certain perspective. I appreciate that from you.
Cool. Thanks, Roderick. Thanks, listeners. We'll speak to you very soon. Take care.
Thank you.